One piece of smart technology could help solve a murder mystery in Arkansas.
2 Pine Bluff teens are in jail tonight facing murder charges. Police say they are in custody in connection to the shooting death of 2 17-year-olds.
It was a bizarre story in Russellville, Arkansas today. A man who reportedly quit his job over low pay went on a shooting spree with 2 handguns.
Tributes are pouring in for Ann Presley. The Little Rock TV anchorwoman died over the weekend.
A suspect in the deadly Fayetteville shooting on New Year's Day in court this morning.
A Little Rock mother is pleading for help tonight. She is asking anyone.
Thanks for listening to Strictly Homicide, an Arkansas true crime podcast covering lesser-known cases out of the natural state. I'd like to start off by thanking my Patreon supporters. If you'd like to help support us, you can find us on Patreon and help with as little as $1 a month. There's also a donate button for a one-time donation on strictlyhomicide.com. Please stay tuned until the end of the show to hear a few promos from some of my favorite shows. Are you a fan of Strictly Homicide Podcast? Well, of course you are. What would you say if I told you that you can earn points that allow you to purchase gift cards just for listening to Strictly Homicide and any other podcast you listen to? I want to tell you about an app that I love. I noticed a new app pop up on my suggestions for something called PodCoin. The description was that you can earn points that convert to gift cards for listening to podcasts through the app. I thought it sounded awesome, but was skeptical. Like, way too good to be true. A week later, I was listening to one of my favorite podcasts, All Crime No Cattle with Shay and Aaron. When I heard Shay mention the app, I thought, hey, if Shay and Aaron approve, so will I. I downloaded the app and tested it for 2 weeks, and I love it. I listen to shows all day in the background while I'm at work, so it was easy to start racking up points. The points you earn for listening can be used to purchase things like gift cards, including gift cards to Starbucks. And if y'all know me at all, you know how much I love Starbucks and how much I need it to live. I use PodCoin to listen to all my shows. There hasn't been a show I couldn't find. And the app is also super easy to use. It's free to download, and you automatically earn 300 points if you use the invite code HOMICIDE. Warning: Strictly Homicide covers cases that include sexual assault, violence, and homicide. Episodes may contain explicit language and are not suitable for young ears. Listener discretion is advised. Hey y'all, welcome back and thanks for sticking with me. I know the episodes are a little spread out right now, but soon they'll get back on track to bi-weekly. I appreciate everyone's patience. For this episode, I kind of have a guest with me while I'm recording. You won't hear him though because he doesn't talk, but the famous Groot the Beardy is recording with me. Episode 23 takes us to a white county town of about 4.6 square miles and a population just over 2,800. The tiny town's name is Bald Knob, Arkansas, where the Ozarks meet the Delta. Native Americans used this area for camping during their hunting trips down the White River Valley. It is said that Hernando de Soto discovered the town while exploring the Mississippi River in 1541. The prominent treeless ridge of layered rock served as a landmark to the pioneers. The huge rock was nearly an acre in size and was visible from a very far distance. Just south of Bald Knob lies the Liberty Valley, a site of prehistoric salt extraction. During the Civil War, 2 bushels of salt was extracted in a single day. Salt making was an enterprise carried out in Arkansas for over 600 years. The Native Americans began making salt around 1400 to add flavor to their food. Salt was an important nutrient for those living in hot climates. It was also used for rituals. How did they make the salt? Well, groundwater passes through the underground sediments formed by ancient seas, which brings salt to the surface in a liquid form, brine. When the brine evaporates, salts are recrystallized. European explorers and American settlers would use and sell it until a better quality and cheaper salt became available. Arkansas salt makers would boil the water in large kettles over wood fires until 1864, when the Union troops broke most of the kettles. A few that were not broken still remain in a private possession. When the railroad arrived in 1872, officials were interested in extracting the rock in the area. They began work in 1877, and by 1880, 56 of the 221 townspeople were working there. Most of the workers were from Ireland. In 1873, the founding father, Benjamin Franklin Brown, posted a sign beside the railroad naming the town Bald Knob. The rock extraction continued and furnished ballasts for J. Gold's Bald Knob Memphis Railroad. This was built between 1886 and 1888. And in 1878, a post office was applied for, and the first mayor was elected in 1881. By 1880, the rock extracting wound down, since the sandy upsoil was ideal for growing strawberries. That's what they began to do. And in 1910, they organized a strawberry association. In 1920, the rock extracting picked up again, furnishing rocks for buildings at Southwestern College, now known as Rhodes College, in Memphis, Tennessee. In 1921, Benjamin Brown, June Collision, and Ernest Wynn started the Strawberry Company and built the longest strawberry shed in the world at that time. The shed was 3/4 of a mile and stood parallel to the Missouri Railroad tracks, which is now Union Pacific. For years, carloads of strawberries were shipped from the Waller family strawberry market. Growers sold $3.5 million worth of strawberries in 1951, naming Bald Knob, this tiny little town with the weirdest name, the strawberry capital of the world. Today, they still hold an annual Homefest festival in early May, including several strawberry-themed events. Today, a hobby shop and museum displays the history of Bald Knob and the Missouri Pacific Railroad, where you can also see antique passenger cars and an antique caboose. The estimated median household income in Bald Knob is $28,472, with the median home price being $79,475. The town's population is 90% white, and 31% of the population is below poverty level. Our case took place in 1995 when the world's population was 5.6 billion and a gallon of gas cost $1.09. During this year, the 49ers won the Super Bowl, Nebraska was the NCAA football champs, and the Arkansas Razorbacks, Woo Pig Suey, made it to the NCAA championship during March Madness. I'm sure most Hog fans remember this because Mr. T still talks about the upset when UCLA beat the Razorbacks. UCLA nearly lost during the second round against Missouri. This was the same year that Michael Jordan returned to the NBA after a year-long retirement to play minor league baseball. In 1995, tragedy struck Oklahoma City on April 19th, when Timothy McVeigh bombed the federal building. A few months later, the New York Times and Washington Post published the Unabomber's manifesto, and 2 weeks later, O.J. Simpson was acquitted on 2 counts of murder. The world also lost an amazing man. This was the year that Bob Ross lost his fight with cancer.
Hello, I'm Bob Ross, and I'd like to welcome you to the 29th Joy of Painting series. If this is your first time with us, allow me to extend a personal invitation for you to get your brushes and your paints and paint along with us each show. And if you've been with us before, please allow me to thank you for inviting us back for another series of painting shows.
In April, a small community in Arkansas would be completely devastated. Jack Henry Jones Jr. would make a choice to take someone's life, landing him on Arkansas's death row, and becoming inmate number 5 to be scheduled for execution during Arkansas's 2017 rushed execution. This case was a really hard case for me. Jack Jones really was a fucking monster. He absolutely deserved his punishment without any doubt. While the murderer needed to be executed, I still feel that the way that they rushed the 8 executions wasn't right. There is a reason that they have a process. Once someone is sentenced to death, there are times when people are wrongfully convicted and sit on death row for 18 years and 78 days. This is why they have an appeals process. I hate the fact that the victim's family has to live through the often very long, tedious execution process. And I cannot even begin to imagine what it's like to lose someone you love to a horrible crime. I totally get wanting to punish the person who took their life. But we have to remember that there are laws and processes in place for a reason. But a monster like Jack Jones will make it very hard for you to remember that. Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson scheduled 8 inmates to be executed during an 11-day period in April 2017. This is part 5 of the 8-part series, Rushed Execution. If this is your first episode, I would go back and start with episode 19. The governor scheduled 2 inmates a day for 4 days so they can use the lethal injection drug that they stockpiled that were about to expire. Although Arkansas has executed more than 1 inmate in a day, they have never rushed executions like they did in April 2017. In 1997, Arkansas executed 3 inmates in 1 day. 1999 was the last year that multiple inmates were executed in 1 day, until 2017. From 2005 to 2017, Arkansas's executions came to a halt due to a shortage of the drugs and controversy leading to court cases and lawsuits. Manufacturers no longer wanted their drugs to be used to kill people, which made it nearly impossible for states to obtain effective and reliable FDA-approved drugs. In 2011, Hospice Inc., the sole U.S. manufacturer, moved their production facility to Italy, where officials demanded assurance that their drug would no longer be used to kill people. The company requested that prison officials in multiple states discontinue the use of their drug. The shortage of the drugs caused the states to use whatever anesthetic and sedatives that they could get their hands on. They scrambled. Some states stockpiled their supply. Others had to explore other options. Using alternative drugs meant that they would need to be approved, often creating a lengthy process. Ohio was the first state to use a single dose of pentobarbital, and many states followed. Some states used suppliers in England until the British government banned the drug from being shipped. Georgia found a way around getting the drug until the Enforcement Administration seized it. Midazolam was being used, normally used for anesthesia, procedural sedation, trouble sleeping, and severe agitation. The drug causes a loss of ability to create new memories while increasing sleepiness and reducing anxieties. When it is injected into a muscle, it takes about 15 minutes to begin working, but the effect can last anywhere from 1 to 6 hours, but you never know. The drug is commonly used combined with an opiate before the induction of general anesthesia and for sedation when someone is ventilated in an intensive care unit. There has been so much controversy over the use of this drug due to numerous botched executions. Lawyers argue that it might not protect the inmate from pain and suffering, which is against the Eighth Amendment. From 1890 to 2010, it's estimated that 3% of all executions were botched, with the highest percentage coming from lethal injection. In 2014, an execution in Ohio lasted 24 minutes, with the inmate gasping for air, appearing to be choking. 3 minutes after the midazolam was injected into the inmate, he lifted his head and said to the family, I love you," and then lied back down. A minute later, his stomach swelled up in an unusual way. The inmate struggled and gasped for air, clenching his fists the entire time. About 10 minutes later, the doctors listened for a heartbeat, and 4 minutes after that, he was pronounced dead. During the same year, an execution lasted over an hour with the inmate gasping and snorting. They used the same 2-drug cocktail as the one in Ohio. Also, in 2014, they struggled to find a vein in an inmate, attempting and failing twice through his left arm, once in his brachial vein, 3 times in his jugular vein, twice in his left foot, and then finally succeeded in a vein in his groin. 10 minutes after they administered the midazolam, he was ready for the next 2 drugs. But as soon as they administered them, he immediately struggled violently and raised his head. Then he spoke and said, "Oh man, something's wrong." He attempted to rise again before exhaling loudly. A doctor stopped the execution when it became clear that he had vein failure. He was pronounced dead due to a heart attack almost an hour later. In June 2015, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that attorneys for 3 Oklahoma inmates failed to prove that midazolam was cruel and unusual when compared to alternatives. In October 2016, Ohio announced that they would switch to the 3-drug cocktail after the 2014 botched execution led to questions about the dosage, drug choice, and timing. After a botched execution in December of 2016, Arizona stopped using midazolam. In April 2017, Arkansas's stockpile of the drug was expiring, so the state decided in February to rush 8 executions in 4 days. I'm not saying that the Arkansas 8 did not deserve their punishment. I'm saying that the decision to rush to execute the 8 individuals in such a compressed time frame resulted in an unprecedented amount of litigation over the course of about 3 weeks. Suits were filed on behalf of the drug companies and inmates. The men scheduled to be executed first were Bruce Ward and Don Davis, which I covered in part 1 and part 2 of this series. So if this is your first time listening, you might want to go back and listen to the first 4 parts. Both of those men were granted a stay of execution. The next inmate scheduled on April 20th, 2017 was Liddell Lee and Stacy Johnson. Liddell Lee was the first inmate in over 11 years and the first of the 8 men to be executed. Stacy Johnson was also granted a stay of execution. On April 24th, the first double execution in 17 years occurred. The first man executed was Jack Henry Jones Jr., the topic of this episode. Mary Phillips moved to the Bald Knob area from down south in Hope, Arkansas, with her husband James and their 3 children, Darla, Jesse, and Lacey. James and Mary were high school sweethearts and both adored each other. Mary was a bookkeeper and worked for a tax and accounting service in Bald Knob. Mary was an awesome mother and always put her family first. The family would often garden together or find other outdoor activities to do. She is often described as an all-around great person. No one ever had anything bad to say about Mary. She was very much loved in her church, her family, and her community. Their children felt like they were the luckiest kids ever to have the parents that they had. Their son describes her as the greatest woman that he has ever met. It was and still is completely obvious that James, Darla, Jesse, and Lacey knew Mary was one of a kind. On June 6, 1995, a monster would change the lives of the Phillips forever. June 6th in 1995 was a typical hot summer day for Arkansas. Mary Phillips was at her place of employment when a man Mary never seen before came in and asked to borrow some books. She got the books and gave them to the man, and he left. Mary's youngest 11-year-old daughter, Lacey, had a dentist appointment that day, and her older sister, who was 17, Darla, had a birthday party to attend, so she told her mom that she would drop Lacey off at her work before heading to the party. James, Mary's husband, was away on a business trip 500 miles away. Darla walked her sister into her mother's work, kissed her mom, and told her that she loved her. Lacey's dentist appointment was at 3, so she began closing up for the day since she was the only employee there at the time. Before they can close down completely and leave, a man walked into the office. Mary noticed the man, but Lacey did not. It was the same man who came in earlier to borrow books. The man told Mary that she gave him the wrong books. Mary apologized, asked him to return tomorrow, and she'll make sure that he gets the correct ones. She let him know that they were rushing out to get Lacey to her appointment. The man looked at the two of them and said, "I'm sorry." Mary said it was fine and she'll fix it tomorrow if he would just come back. The man told her, "No, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to rob you." Next, he ordered Mary to lie down on her stomach, followed by ordering Lacey to lie down on top of her mother with her stomach facing down. Both Mary and Lacey did exactly as the man ordered. Then he walked over to the cash register and emptied it. Next, he demanded that they both go to the back and took them into a small break room. There was a small room connected to the break room where the man sat Lacey on a chair and tied her up. Lacey was scared. She was only 11 years old. She was just a small child. She was visibly upset and began crying. She begged him, "Please don't hurt my mama." The man looked at Lacey and said, "I'm not. I'm going to hurt you." This was the last thing that Lacey remembers before he began choking her until she passed out. The man didn't stop there. He struck her multiple times in the head with a barrel of a BB gun. He left her in the small room to die and went back in with Mary, where he tied her up with her hands behind her back. He then brutally raped her. After raping her, he strangled her, and before he left, he grabbed a cord of a nearby coffee pot, wrapped it around her neck, and then left. I want to pause right here to hear a word from one of our sponsors. I want to take a moment to talk about Geeks United podcast hosted by Al and Bob. While usually a nerd-centric pop culture podcast, Geeks United with Al and Bob are both thrilled and chilled to announce their newest series, The Frightening 50. In bite-sized episodes, they'll go over the creepiest, weirdest, and most paranormal urban legends, folklore, and ghost stories in each of the 50 states. Plus, check out all of their other podcasts in Geeks United universe. Just search for Geeks United with Al and Bob on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, and more. Check out the episode notes for links. And now back to the case. Back at the Phillips house, Darla and Jesse were waiting for their mom and sister to return. When they did not arrive around 6 p.m., Jesse called his father, who was out of town, and told him that Mom and Lacey haven't returned home yet. Mr. Phillips asked them to go search nearby to see if the car had broken down. Jesse did just as his father asked and called him back to let him know that he didn't see anything. Mr. Phillips told his son to stay indoors and wait for them to arrive home. He said, "They'll be home in a while." Time passed by. When no one heard from or saw Mary and Lacey, the police were called to the office in Bald Knob. 3 officers entered the office, where they found Mary's body nude from the waist down, with the cord from the coffee maker around her neck. Her hands were tied behind her back with wire. Her body had bruises all over her arms and back, which indicated that she put up a fight during the attack. The autopsy report would later show that she was raped anally and died from blunt force head injury and strangulation. Lacey was found in the small room nearby, lifeless, tied to a chair with severe lacerations and multiple skull fractures. One of the officers began photographing the crime scene. While taking the first picture, the flash went off, and that's when he saw Lacey open one eye and look up at him. He'll never forget that scene. All 3 of the men who were first there said that they will never forget that night. The officer says that he still has that picture. Lacey's hair was covered in blood and matted, covering half of her face, with this big, bright eye looking up at him in fear. Lacey was questioned, and when she described the man, officers knew who it was. She said that the man who did this to her had a teardrop tattoo on his face and tattoos on his arm. Jack Jones Jr. was well known by the Searcy police officers, and he fit that description. Investigators went to Jack Jones' home and asked him if he would come into the sheriff's office and answer some questions. Jones agreed. At the sheriff's office, he was read his Miranda rights and signed a waiver of rights form. During the questioning, Jack admitted to committing the crime, saying he wanted to get revenge on the police because his wife was raped and they did nothing about it. He then told the investigators in detail how the crime was committed. They say that if Lacey didn't survive, they may have never caught Jones. Lacey was the key to catching Jones. 500 miles away, around 11 p.m., Mr. Phillips received a call at the hotel. He was informed that something happened and he needed to return home. He immediately packed up his things, called his supervisor, and drove home. Jack Henry Jones Jr. was sentenced to death for the murder of Mary Phillips, life for the rape of Mary Phillips, and 30 years for the attempted murder of Lacey. He would file appeal after appeal during his time on death row. This case will continue next episode, episode 24, part 2. Thank you so much for downloading episode 23 of Strictly Homicide Podcast. I appreciate every download, every listen, every review, and every Patreon member. Upcoming episodes will include part 2 of this episode and the final 3 inmates in the rushed execution series. And I have a big cold case coming up. Please stick around for 2 promos from a new true crime podcast called True Crime Chronicles, hosted by Will and Jessica, and a promo for Aska's Mystery Podcast, a show that is written and hosted by a 5-year-old, thanks to the amazing Make-A-Wish Foundation. Strictly Homicide is written, hosted, and produced by me, Nicki T. The original music is done by Mr. T. No, not that one. My Mr. T.
If you are a fan of the show, please make sure you are subscribed on iTunes and please rate and review the show. You can also find us on Patreon where you can support the show for as little as $1 a month.
If there is a case that you would like to discuss, or if you have any comments, corrections, or suggestions, send us an email at strictlyhomicide@yahoo.com or on social media. You can find us on most social media sites by searching Strictly Homicide Podcast and on Twitter as @StrictlyHMICIDE. That's Strictly Homicide with no O. You can also visit our website, strictlyhomicide.com. Stick around to hear a few promos from some of the best podcasts around, and until next time, y'all stay safe, especially you, Arkansas.
Every time I thought it couldn't get any more bizarre, it always did.
And I'm begging, and pleading for my life. I don't want to die. Please don't kill me.
We've actually been contacted by people who believed their family members are serial killers.
True crime comes in all shapes and sizes.
I will say one of the first times I went out there, I said, this is going to go down bad.
Some stories will shock you.
This is a murderer. I know that people are innocent until proven guilty, but we're not talking about a smashing a mailbox here.
Others might make you cry.
To think that their anger or their money is more important than somebody else's, is in somebody's life.
And some just leave us asking questions. Lots of questions.
It was really unusual for a person to have on men's dress socks and nothing else. That's very odd.
Our new weekly podcast, True Crime Chronicles, covers them all.
I'm Will Johnson.
And I'm Jessica Knoll.
And we believe that it's vital to talk to the people who were there when it all went down.
I was basically left for dead by him.
They followed my every move. I got death threats by the hundreds.
We're diving deep into our archive of cases from local newsrooms across the country, going back decades, and telling you about ones you might not have heard of.
The community still talks about it to this day, the redhead in the refrigerator.
And bringing a new perspective to bigger, more well-known stories.
This is the largest cluster of unsolved strangulations in American history.
True Crime Chronicles, a new podcast from Vault Studios.
Coming soon to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts.
There is no retirement plan for serial killers.
My name is Aska Sharif. I am 5 years old. I am in kindergarten at Stevenson School in Des Plaines. And I am doing a podcast on a story I wrote. The name is The Stealer of the Diamond.
Listen to this episode of Aska's Mystery Podcast, written and created by 5-year-old Aska. Find it wherever you get your podcasts.